Kia ora everyone. I'll just start in a minute or so. We'll just wait for the event to start properly. I'll get started now. Kia ora koutou katoa and welcome to this workshop. We'll open with karakia. Tikina tikina atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero. I runga I te rangi Mārie, kia ngāko te tikaha. Kia mau ki te honga tangata, ka whakamoa, kia tina, hui e, tai kia. Kia ora, I'm Cara Palmer-Alcorn. I'm the manager of the Media and Screen Policy team here at Manatū Taonga, the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. We have sign language interpreters for this session. Today we have Kelly and Sally. If you've indicated that you need interpreting assistance, we'll make sure that Kelly and Sally are in your breakout room. If you need that assistance but you haven't let us know yet, please just use the Q&A tab to do that. You can also turn on captioning, and we've included instructions on how to turn this on in the Q&A tab as well. The session today, the presentation today will be recorded. This is to ensure that people who are unable to attend can still have the same information to support their engagement with the proposals. However, the group discussions and the feedback from that won't be recorded. We take people's privacy seriously and will make sure that all collection, retention, and access of personal information is done responsibly and respectfully. All personal information shared during these sessions is held in accordance with the Privacy Act, Official Information Act, and the Public Records Act. And you can find out more information about that on our website at mch.govt.nz/privacy. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join today's workshop, which forms part of our media reform public consultation process. Media reform includes 5 proposals that aim to create modern media legislation for New Zealand's media and content production sector. The proposal that we'll be discussing today is about increasing captioning and audio description. I would like to stress that this proposal is high level and the government has not decided whether to progress it. The purpose of this consultation is to hear your feedback on all of the proposals and how we could improve or change them to support the best outcomes for the sector and for audiences. Any proposals that are ultimately agreed by Cabinet would require legislation to implement. They would come into force in 2026 at the earliest. Today, I will give a brief presentation on the proposal and then we'll break out into groups for discussion. We'll then come back together as the group to share some of the key themes from your discussion. To make the most of our time, I'll start the presentation now and then we'll allow space for introductions in those breakout groups. So firstly, I'll provide some context for this proposal. Captioning and audio description support engagement with media content. Captioning provides a text display of spoken words and sounds. It is mostly used by people who are deaf and hard of hearing, but research indicates that nearly half of New Zealanders have watched media content with captions in the last year. Audio description provides narration of what's happening on screen. It is mostly used by people who are blind or have low vision. Through New Zealand On Air, the government currently provides funding for captioning and audio description for local broadcasters. This is carried out by a not-for-profit organisation called ABLE. However, New Zealand media don't have any legal requirements to provide captioning and audio description. These requirements do exist in other countries that we generally compare ourselves to. And advocates have been calling for some time for local laws to require captioning and audio description for media content. New Zealand has obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to help ensure access to media, one of these obligations is to take appropriate measures to ensure disabled people have access to information on an equal basis with others. The problem here is that the current level of captioning and audio description in New Zealand doesn't provide all New Zealanders with equitable access to media. This primarily affects our disabled communities, but there are many other people who can benefit, particularly from captioning. For instance, we know it can support engagement for people whose first language isn't the language being spoken. Some of our broadcasters provide more captioning and audio description than others, but there is less available on their streaming platforms. And overall, New Zealand media seems to have lower levels of captioning and audio description than other comparable countries. These lower levels may be creating a particular barrier for local content, which is mostly provided through local broadcasters and their apps. The UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has raised concerns about New Zealand's compliance with the Convention. It is recommended that New Zealand should introduce laws to increase captioning and audio description. As I mentioned earlier, other countries that we often compare to New Zealand have legislation to support captioning and audio description. There are different types of obligations, and some countries use a combination of them. For example, annual targets for captioning apply to subscription TV providers in Australia. Both Australia and Canada require captioning between 6 a.m. and midnight. These obligations apply to free-to-air broadcasters in Australia and to most broadcasters in Canada. Canada also requires most of its broadcasters to audio describe content that is in English or French between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. The United Kingdom has percentage-based targets for captioning and audio description, which broadcasters have to meet over a 10-year period. Australia is also considering requirements for an increasing number of hours per week of audio description. Some of these obligations apply to streaming and on-demand platforms, sometimes with modifications. The aim of the proposal we're discussing today is to increase the accessibility of media content through captioning and audio description. This is intended to provide more equitable access to local media for all New Zealanders and to comply with New Zealand's obligations under the UN Convention. We think this aim aligns with the overall objectives for media reform. The proposal is to create legislative obligations for TV broadcasters and streaming platforms operating in New Zealand to provide equitable access to their content. There would be progressive targets for broadcasters and streamers to meet over time. For example, regulations could set a percentage of content that has to be captioned and a percentage that has to be audio described that increases each year. Other countries have also factored in a period for technical capability building before the targets kick in. This is something we could look at too. This approach of phasing implementation aims to make sure progress happens in a way that is feasible for media providers. We know that local media are struggling financially, and we need to keep sight of the overall aims of media reform. Finally, there might also be an opportunity to specify types of content that should be prioritised for captioning or audio description. We're seeking feedback on whether you think this is a good idea, and if you think it is, what types of content you think are most important to prioritise to caption or audio describe. We're now going to move into breakout rooms where you can have a discussion about the proposal. We'd really like to understand your views on the potential impacts of the proposal and what you think needs to be top of mind for the government if it decides to move forward into detailed design. everyone has been pre-assigned a group, so you should be moved automatically. We've had a few tech issues, so apologies. If you're not moving to a group, please use the Q&A function to let us know, and we'll make sure we resolve that as quickly as possible. Great, thanks. See you soon.